Let's learn more about the Queen's Gambit. Start by moving your Queen's pawn to d4. You can play the Queen's Gambit when I reply with my pawn to the square d5, like this. Gambit your bishop's pawn by pushing it to the square c4 and attacking my center. In this lesson, we will look at some interesting ways that I might decline the Queen's Gambit. This defense is named after the great American player Frank Marshall. The Marshall defense isn't very good. Let's see why. Start by exchanging the pawns in the center. I will recapture with my knight. Strike at the center with your king's pawn and dislodge my knight from his post. My knight is threatened and must retreat from the center. Watch out! I'm attacking your hanging pawn on the square e4. Develop your knight to the square c3 and defend your center. You have established a strong central pawn duo, while I have wasted 2 turns moving my knight back and forth. You can see why this defense isn't that popular. Develop your other knight to the square f3. I will develop my bishop and prepare to castle. You should do the same. Develop your bishop to the square d3 and prepare to castle next. After we both castle, it's clear that your position is superior. The Marshall defense allows you to get a good position with little effort. My development lags behind while yours is nearly complete. Next, let's test your memory a bit. Here we are again, the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. Let's see if you remember what to play against the Marshall defense. That isn't the move that we reviewed. Look for a capture that wins a tempo instead. Let's see if you remember what to play against the Marshall defense. Capturing my pawn right away. Okay, I will capture back. Do you remember what your best move is in this position? Nice move. Okay, I'll retreat. What move should you play now? Nice move. Developing a knight and defending your center pawn. Let's look at another offbeat variation of the Queen's Gambit declined next. This time I will play a wild move named after a famous Russian player from the 19th century, Mikhail Chigorin. This is the Chigorin defense, a favorite weapon of tricksters and tacticians. Let me show you how to tame it. Start by developing your knight to the square c3. I will capture your pawn. Discovering my queen, which is now applying pressure to your queen's pawn, move your knight to the square f3 to develop and defend. I will also develop a knight. Just like in the Queen's Gambit accepted, advance your pawn 1 square to e3 to defend your center, and prepare to recapture your pawn. I will continue developing and trying to cause you problems. My bishop pins your knight to your queen, but you can ignore this for now and calmly recapture your pawn on the square c4. Before I can castle, I need to develop my dark squared bishop, and before I do that I need to move a pawn, so I moved my pawn to free my bishop. You're free to castle kingside and complete your development. This simple approach to the Chigorin leads to a solid position where you are castled and have no weaknesses. Let's test your memory of what we looked at so far. Ready? Here we are in the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. Do you remember what to play against the Chigorin defense? Developing a piece and attacking the center. I think I will release the tension and exchange pawns. By exchanging pawns, I'm discovering an attack on your pawn. What's your plan to defend it? Nice move. My bishop attacks your knight and threatens to remove the defender of your pawn. Do you remember the solid move that I showed you here? That's it. This solid setup will allow you to recapture the pawn with your bishop and develop without any issues. Onwards. Back to the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. What if I were to develop my bishop? This is called the Baltic defense. Begin by developing naturally with your knight to the square c3. Allow me to show you a trap that I sometimes play for as black in this opening. Develop your knight to the square f3, preparing to castle kingside. Sorry, that wasn't the right move. Let's go back and look again. Develop your knight to the square f3, preparing to castle kingside. I will also develop my kingside knight. As we have seen in other variations, calmly play your king's pawn forward to the square e3 and firmly defend your center. Here comes my tricky idea. My knight threatens to hop to a dangerous square next. Move your pawn to the square a3 to prevent this. The Baltic has this one trick, but if you develop and castle, then there is nothing to fear. Okay, let's test your memory a bit. Okay, let me try something tricky. This is the Baltic variation that we reviewed in the previous chapter. Do you remember what move to play here? That's a fine move. I firmed up my center with this pawn move. Your turn. So far, so good. There are many good moves here, but do you remember the one that I showed you? If I play my pawn to the square c6, this would turn into the Slav defense that we will look at later in this lesson. Let's see. What if I develop my knight? Do you see my tricky idea? Excellent move. This prevents my knight from coming to b4. Okay, let's look at a slightly more complicated variation next. Are you ready? In this example, we will see a variation of the Queen's Gambit declined named after the German master Siegbert Tarrasch. Tarrasch was the best player in the world in 1890s, though he was never officially the world champion. Just as before, develop your knight to the square c3. This time, I will challenge your center immediately with my bishop's pawn. This move is the hallmark of the Tarrasch defense. Clarify the center by exchanging pawns on the square d5. This early exchange limits my options in the center. Develop your knight to the square f3. I will also develop a knight. Against the Tarrasch defense, it's a good idea to fianchetto your light-squared bishop. Play your pawn to the square g3 to prepare this plan. I will develop my other knight. Fianchetto your bishop and prepare to castle next. Before I can castle, I must also move my bishop. Simply castle and complete your development. My turn to castle. The Tarrasch defense is solid, but not too threatening if you remember to exchange pawns in the center and fianchetto your bishop. Let's see if you remember this plan. It's my turn, and I am going to challenge your center immediately with this defense. How should you respond? That isn't the move that I showed you. Release the tension in the center instead. This defense. How should you respond? Exchanging pawns and releasing the tension so soon? Okay, I will capture back. Your move. Do you remember what to play here? This move gives you a clear lead in development. Well, I need to catch up. How should you continue developing your pieces? That's an excellent plan. How should you continue? You have an excellent memory. I am ready to castle next and then finish my development. Do you recall what move I showed you here? Nice work remembering this plan against the Tarish defense. Let's look at a tricky variation next. This next example is a counter gambit to the Queen's Gambit. I like to play the Albin counter gambit to undermine your center and gain the initiative with rapid development. Start by capturing the offered pawn. Before I lose my other pawn, I will advance it to the square d4, grabbing just a little bit more space in the center. Develop your knight to the square f3 and attack my d-pawn. I will develop and defend. Just as you did against the last defense, fianchetto your kingside bishop against the Albin counter gambit by moving your pawn to the square g3. My knight will trace out a path to g6 via e7 to regain the lost pawn. But my plan takes several moves, giving you ample opportunity to complete your development. Move your bishop to the square g2 and prepare to castle. I will continue with my plan. And you can continue with yours by castling. The Albin counter gambit can be a sharp weapon in the hands of a clever tactician, but if you capture the offered pawn and then fianchetto and castle, there is little to worry about. Okay, in this challenge, let's see if you can remember how to meet the tricky Albin counter gambit. I am offering you a free pawn in the center. Will you accept it? The best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. My pawn advances, intending to frustrate your development by preventing your knight from coming to the square c3. What might you play instead? Your queen and knight are both attacked my pawn on the square d4, so I will develop and defend it. Your move. Any ideas? Nice work remembering this idea. My knight was unable to go to the square f6, so I am going to develop it this way instead. Your move. Nice move. Okay, I'm going to attack your pawn a second time with my knight. Should you defend it? Well done. Castling and completing your development is more important than defending the pawn. Let's look at the most important variation in this lesson next, the Slav defense. I have saved this one for last. The Slav defense is one of the most solid choices for me to play against the Queen's Gambit. This storied variation has been played by world champions for centuries. You can avoid the complexity by exchanging pawns. I will take back with my pawn. Develop your queen's knight to the square c3. I will develop my knight to the square f6. This next move is important. Develop your bishop to the square f4 before moving your pawn forward to e3. If you move your pawn forward to the square e3 first, then your bishop would be stuck behind the pawns. Now play your pawn forward to the square e3, supporting your center and freeing your other bishop to come into the game. I will play symmetrically with my queenside bishop. Develop your other knight to the square f3. I will move my own e-pawn, freeing my kingside bishop. Move your bishop to the square d3, challenging my light-squared bishop directly. Your bishop on the square d3 is very strong. Luckily, I can exchange bishops. Capture back with your queen. Now I will repeat your idea with my own dark-squared bishop. If you ignore my bishop, it will become a powerful force on the dark squares. Capturing my bishop will prevent this. I will capture back. And now we are both free to castle kingside. Castling on the queen side would be dangerous with the open c-file, so I will castle kingside too. The battle for control of the open file lies ahead. Another plan is to break in the center with your e-pawn. Let's see if you remember what we have just looked at. If you wanted to play the Queen's Gambit, what would your first move be? I will reply in kind. Do you remember which pawn to gambit? Here we are in the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. I have elected the Slav defense, a favorite weapon of mine. Do you remember how to reply? That move isn't the one that we reviewed. Exchange your pawn for mine instead. I have elected the Slav defense, a favorite weapon of mine. Do you remember how to reply? Exchanging pawns? Okay, I have recaptured. How should you continue your development? Good move. Before you move your king's pawn forward to the square e3, you should develop your dark squared bishop. Do you remember where it should go? Nice move. I see that you know the exchange Slav rather well. How should you continue? Very principled. Okay, I will also develop a piece. Before you can develop your light-squared bishop, you must move a pawn. But which one? That move isn't what we reviewed. Make a pawn move that allows you to develop your light-squared bishop next instead. Before you can develop your light-squared bishop, you must move a pawn. But which one? Very good. Your light-squared bishop is ready to be developed next. Do you remember where you should place your light-squared bishop? Offering an exchange of bishops. Okay, I accept. Your move. Nice move. I will repeat your idea and develop my bishop to offer an exchange as well. What do you think? Nice work remembering the moves of the exchange Slav. Good work completing this lesson, Marco. You may want to repeat it again in a week. Chess players have to practice their openings often in order to remember them.